I'm Peter Elston, and I'm here with Michele Worden. Michele, why don't you tell us who you are?
Thank you, Peter. So my name is Michele Worden, and I was the advanced neonatal nurse practitioner on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. I started on the unit in 1988 as a staff midwife and worked my way up to neonatal sister. Then I undertook the nurse practitioner course, advanced nurse practitioner course, and subsequent to that, I was employed on the neonatal junior medical rota.
And shall we just tell everybody a little bit about how you and I got to know each other?
Yes, that would be really good, Peter. So,
yes, I mean, I'm struggling. It's such a long time ago now, but I think we came across each other, didn't we? Not that long after the verdicts, when I was quite active with a lot of my blog members, and I think through that I came across your name as being, as you were just explaining, a former nurse at the Countess. And then I guess it wasn't that long after that that I somehow managed to actually connect with you. And of course, then realised just what an important voice you were with respect to the Lucy Letby case. And as you'll explain in a moment, just how much you spoke up all those many, many years ago. Am I kind of right about?
You are absolutely right. I felt that I was rescued by you because at the time I was on some social media groups speaking up in defence of Lucy at a time when the trial was going on and she was being absolutely vilified as the worst serial killer in the UK history. And I consequently was very badly trolled for speaking out on what I saw as a miscarriage of justice and a trial that was not telling the whole truth. And you got in contact with me because somebody had reposted one of my tweets at the time and was using it to troll me. And that's how we met.
That's right. I remember now.
Yeah.
Yes, because I was quite firm with whoever it was who was trolling you, who was, I think, retweeting stuff that may have been on your Facebook page, essentially private messages. And I think I remember, putting my foot down and saying that just, shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, and I was immensely grateful to you. And from that, we've formed a friendship. And secondly, we have become interconnected with so many other like-minded individuals who have serious concerns about the trial, the evidence presented, how the evidence was presented, the expert witnesses, and all the things that were never actually told at the trial, which is one of the points that I'm very happy to discuss, which was the nursing issues on the unit.
And to me, you've been one of the key voices of a nurse, and there's various medics and healthcare professionals who've become very outspoken about this case. And I've got to know some really interesting people like yourself. I mean, as for me, I think many people will know that I'm not a medic. My interest goes back 2.5 years to when I first heard about this case, this trial that was about to start, and having had an interest in background in statistics, I looked at that case and saw that there were some really, really questionable aspects from a statistics perspective. And only later did I come to learn more about the medical side of things. And your voice with respect to the medical aspects, the nursing aspects, has really helped me to understand things from that perspective. And indeed, what Michele and I are going to be talking about a number of things. But I think, Michele, we're going to start by talking about the staffing issues that you highlighted, because you were very much part of those. So why don't you
Okay,
say a little
so
bit?
in the 2000s, it became obvious that when a registered nurse left for whatever reason, maybe they were having babies or moving to another hospital, they were either not being replaced or were being replaced with nursery nurses. Now, nursery nurses had always had a role on the unit. They're a very valuable part of the workforce, but they should be there to enhance the role of a registered nurse, not to replace a registered nurse. And people talk about Lucy Letby keeping documentation. Well, I also have kept documentation. This is a letter dated the 28th of June,
And
2004.
you're not a serial killer, are you?
Well, not at the moment, no. Not
Good.
that I know of.
So you weren't keeping these documents as trophies?
Absolutely not. No.
I mean, I make a serious point here, obviously, because the prosecution were making the argument that Lucy Letby was keeping these documents as trophies, which, of course, is an absurd notion.
I think if you went to any nurse or medic, doctor, paramedic, whatever, physiotherapist, radiologist, whatever, everybody would have some form of documentation that they have kept for whatever reason. I have not only documentation that was formal, as in this letter, but I have cards from parents, I have letters from parents. I, like Lucy, have sent bereavement cards to bereaved parents. I have attended, tragically, babies' funerals. You built up a real rapport with these parents. Some of these babies are on the unit for a long time, and you get to know them and their extended family, the siblings, the aunts, the uncles, and so on.
Well, I mean, there's so many sad things about this case, but one of the things that particularly struck me as being just awful was the fact that nurses now, because of what's happened with the Lucy Letby case, they no longer send condolence cards to parents, which is just such a tragic unintended consequence of this.
Well,
this case.
This has been weaponized against Lucy. As a human being with any sort of feelings, we always made an effort, if a baby died, to send a representative to that baby's funeral. And this has now been weaponized against nurses because of Lucy Letby. You know, it's seen as some sort of macabre thing to do, to send a bereavement card or to attend the baby's funeral or to remember, because it is traumatic when a baby dies on a unit. And I can remember dates when babies have passed away or things have happened. But that has been completely taken out of context for Lucy and completely weaponized against her. And it's so wrong. And it's altered neonatal nursing. I have many friends who are still working within neonatal units and are very reticent now to build up relationships with the parents, with the grandparents, because at some point, is there going to be a knock on the door and they're going to be accused of possibly doing something wrong?
Yeah. I mean, we are going to get on to staffing in a moment, but the other thing you mentioned to me a little while ago, in relation to taking documents home, was how, I forget when, but there was a change, wasn't there? Because previously nurses used to change into their uniform at the hospital. And that's no longer the case. So could you just say a little bit about that and how that pertains to?
Yeah, so we used to always, the hospital used to have laundries and they would wash our uniforms. And when you began your employment, you would be given 3 to 5 uniforms, and at the end of the shift they would be sent to the hospital laundry, and there was a rotational aspect, and you'd pick up a clean uniform when you arrived on duty and you get changed and you put it in the laundry basket when you left duty. Following cost cutting, the laundry service was abolished. So then, not that it is right because of infection control, but a lot of nurses started travelling in their uniform and going home in their uniform because they are washing them at home. And if you've done a 12 and a half hour, 13-hour shift, you possibly have not had anything to eat or drink, you're tired, you just want to get home. So
and
you
might
don't
have put
yeah,
handover notes
anything in your
pockets. You end up back home.
Yeah.
You realise you've got these handover notes. What might you then do with them? I guess some people would throw them away. Some people who may be more diligent would keep them, thinking this is confidential patient information. I shouldn't throw it away.
Yeah.
But there's no process for taking them back to the hospital, perhaps. So you just keep them.
Yes, I think some people will keep it. You've got to remember, these are not medical notes. They have been misled in the press that Lucy had confidential medical notes, and that is not true.
But it is still
information. They still have patient information on them, but a handover note is like an aide memoir to the nurse for each particular shift, or to remind her as a quick and easy way of just looking and going, oh yes, that baby needs this, or I need to phone a physio to come and look at this baby. It's literally just an aid to that nurse for that shift.
And these are notes that get written during the half an hour handover at the beginning of each shift. And the nurses from the previous shift handing over to the nurses on the new shift. And the nurses on the new shift writing down things that they get told by the nurses from the previous shift.
And during the shift, you may cross out things, you may add things in, so that when you're giving handover, you say, oh, by the way, this has happened, or you need to contact, I don't know, again, let's just use a physio as an example. You need to contact the physio to come over and do chest physio, or because this baby's got positional talipes, the parents need to be taught how to exercise the foot. There's a whole list of things. And there's a whole list of agencies that you might be contacting. So it literally is an aid for your memory for that shift, for the babies that you are caring for. And yes, they are confidential and they should technically be destroyed. But, you know, people take things home, and some people are very diligent. They might shred them at home. Some people might bring them back into the unit, and some people might think, I'm going to shove that in a shopping bag and I'm going to get rid of them all together. And they just get forgotten about, and they get put in a garage or on a shelf or wherever. It's not, I'm not saying it's right, but it happens.
And you'd have thought that if Lucy Letby was, well, two things. Firstly, if she was collecting these as trophies, she knew that she was under suspicion. She had ample time to do something
destroy
with those.
them.
It's not exactly the act of a devious serial killer, is it?
And she had a shredder apparently, and never used it, though she said she'd forgotten about the shredder. Maybe because she wasn't using it, she forgot she had one. And also they say that she had, I think off the top of my head, it was quoted that she had something like 246.
That's the other thing I was going to mention, yes.
Handover notes. But
so most of them didn't pertain to babies on the indictment.
No. So they're not trophies, you know, unless you're saying that she's actually murdered 246 babies or harmed 246, which is just ludicrous.
Well, indeed. Now, you mentioned cost cutting there in relation to nurses having to clean their own uniforms, which brings us nicely on to cost cutting and staff cutting. So go back to...
So in 2004...
What are we going back to?
2004.
20 years,
Yeah, 20 years.
So you were an advanced neonatal practitioner.
I was the advanced neonatal nurse practitioner on the unit. And the senior staff became very concerned that they were having to take charge of the unit, look after the sickest babies, and be accountable for nursery nurses who are down a corridor in another nursery that they can't see. And actually, in this letter, it says very clearly that continual excessive workload, particularly from the nurse in charge, is causing serious concerns about the increased risk of clinical incidents. Now, that is 20 years ago. And when these senior staff wrote this letter to management, At that point, they didn't know how bad the staffing was going to become, because subsequent to this, the Department of Health wrote a paper asking networks, regional networks, to look at their units. So in 2004, Chester was actually a level 3 unit. Following the restructuring within the regional neonatal networks.
And was that the decision to set up these regional neonatal networks, which meant that some units were generally the ones in the bigger cities? They were the ones designated to be level 3 units, and the more provincial ones were either became level 2 or level 1. Is that roughly
there was
correct?
Within Mersey region, Chester was a level 3, Leighton in Crewe was a level 3, and so was Warrington. And all three of those units were downgraded to a level 2 because it was deemed that Arrow Park and Liverpool Women's would increase their number of cots to accommodate the babies who required level 3 care. So you had a massive drop in level 3 beds within the region because they didn't do 1-for-1. They increased the beds in Liverpool Women's and Arrow Park, but not to the same level of 3 other units. So subsequent to that, the Countess of Chester Hospital Management, in a cost-cutting exercise, said, you're not going to have the same calibre of babies, the same babies who are so sick. So therefore, we don't need all these senior nursing staff. So the first thing that happened was the manager, who was on a band 8A, was offered voluntary severance, which she refused. She was then downgraded to a band 7, and she had protected pay for 2 years. And when the protected pay came to an end, she left, and a band 6 nurse, who was Ariane Powell, was internally promoted to her post. So they saved some money there. There was 2 band 7 sisters, neonatal sisters, highly experienced. One was given MARS, which is mandatory retirement scheme, which basically encourages you to take early retirement. And the other band 7 sister was moved into a charity that she had set up and was fundraising for. So 2 band 7 posts money was saved by the hospital, and effectively the sister who was moved into the charity arm was then fundraising for her own salary, which is an interesting concept. Following that, they had seconded a band 6 to Southampton University to undertake the advanced neonatal nurse practitioner course. When she qualified, she came back and they said, sorry, we've changed our minds. So she left. So that was another band 6, very experienced nurse who left. There was another 2 band 6 nurses who could see the writing on the wall. There was no career progression. There was a lot of issues going on with the staff just being flogged to death, really, working extra hard. So they left. They were not replaced. And I myself was served compulsory redundancy. At the time, I went to the clinical lead, who was Dr. John Gibbs, and said, do you know what's happening here, John, with the nursing staff? And he said, yes, it's a nursing issue. And these are his words, not mine, because they're ingrained on my memory. I've been told to butt out.
And just to be clear, John Gibbs is one of the accusing doctors, one of those early accusing doctors, which also included Dr. Ravi Jairam and Dr. Stephen Breary.
Yes.
But then John Gibbs was also one of the accusing doctors as well.
Well, John Gibbs, in my day, was the clinical lead for the neonatal unit. After I left, Steve Breary came and he became the clinical lead for the neonatal unit. And Dr. John Gibbs became the clinical lead for the whole paediatric department. And that's the position he held when there was this increase in deaths and the subsequent Lucy Letby. So following my redundancy, I became quite vocal and wrote to quite a few news outlets. I had, they took up my story, and I have the newspaper cuttings. And then in 2011, the chief executive, who was a man called Peter Herring, wrote an article in the local paper about how they were managing to increase the nursing numbers with healthcare assistants, maternity support workers, nursery care assistants. And I was so infuriated by this article, I wrote to the paper the following week and pointed out that all these job titles are just for staff who are not registered, and at the time they were not accountable to anybody. Registered nurses are governed by the NMC, which is the national organisation to make sure nurses are educated to a certain standard, they maintain their skills. All these other people do not have to do that, and I found that quite frightening. And I was also very concerned that these nurses, as they call themselves, maternity support workers, nursery assistants, healthcare assistants, assistant healthcare practitioners, some of them are called, have a certain level of training, but it is not equivalent to a registered nurse or a registered nurse's experience. And in my book, it's an accident waiting to happen, because some of these people...
And I think you actually said that, didn't you?
I did say that
and
to him.
Was that published in the the paper, I think?
Yes.
I mean, obviously your words, Michelle, were incredibly prescient given what later happened in 2015.
Yeah.
And I absolutely commend you for speaking out.
Oh, well, that's really sweet.
Making a stand like that. Well, it was, you know, it was a very brave thing to do.
I think
you weren't prepared to accept what was happening.
No, I'm very passionate about nursing, and I worry for my colleagues, and look what's happened now. But I think a lot of these things, people are not joining the dots up. And I think these chief executives, a lot of them need to be held to account. So the current chief executive at the Countess of Chester is a lady called Jane Tompkinson. In my day, she was the head of the finances. And I have one of her emails here that very clearly says, if I can just find it, it says here, this is in 2006, Jane Tompkinson sent out an email to all staff saying that they were going to close 53 beds. And I quote from her email, "The staffing required to deliver care to patients is currently under review. A consultation paper relating to the nursing element of the workforce across all areas has been issued. The Trust remains committed to avoiding compulsory redundancies wherever possible." Now, that was in 2006, and my redundancy was in 2007. At Thirlwell, she spoke very eloquently and said lessons have been learnt. But what she failed to say was, I'm sorry, because I'm part of the problem. Back in 2006 on this neonatal unit, I was overseeing, as the financial director, the culling of senior nursing staff.
The systematic de-skilling of the nursing team.
Yeah.
And, well, a few things come to mind. The first thing that springs to mind is the service review that was commissioned by the hospital in July 2016, when the hospital executives, the top management, became aware of this elevated mortality. And they commissioned the service review by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health to come in and investigate the elevated mortality. And there was something in that, wasn't there, about the hiring of senior nurses. So I won't say any more, but why don't you take over?
Well, can we just backtrack slightly? So in 2012, 2 brand new, newly qualified nurses were recruited straight out of university, their first jobs, to work on the neonatal unit in Chester, one of whom was Lucy Letby. That was in January 2012. Lucy subsequently attended Liverpool Women's Hospital to undertake what's called the Quality in Speciality qualification, which she passed. And when she returned to Chester, she was deemed to be experienced and senior. Now, you cannot equate somebody who is only 3 years post-grad as being senior compared to somebody like myself that had over 30 years nursing experience. I think combined with the other 7 nurses who, alongside me by various means, were dispensed with, we probably had 200 years experience.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that even though Lucy, it seems pretty clear, was a very good nurse, she actually still lacked a lot of experience given the role that she had as one of the most senior nurses. What you're saying is she should not have been one of the more senior nurses, one of the most senior nurses, because there should have been a lot more.
I mean, we know from statements and things that have come out during the trial that certainly on one occasion there was a baby transferred back from Alder Hey who required immunoglobulin. Lucy was off duty. She had apparently been to a salsa dancing class with her friends, and when she came out, she saw she had 3 missed calls from the unit. So she phoned up the unit and they said, "We don't know how to administer this immunoglobulin. How do we do it?" So she had to talk them through how to administer the immunoglobulin. And subsequent to that, it is reported that when she came back on duty, she sat down with the manager, Ariane Powell, with the nurse who was supposedly practice development, Yvonne Farmer, and her. And between the 3 of them, they then wrote a new guideline on how to administer immunoglobulin.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that these standards were just simply not in place for what I guess is intricate but fairly straightforward process. What did you call it?
It was the administration of immunoglobulin, which is not common, but it's equally not rare. It is used within neonatal units, and Lucy knew how to administer it because she had come back from Liverpool Women's where she'd learnt about it. But I think it shows a real gap in knowledge.
You'd have thought that there would be at least one person there at any time who knew how to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, you would. So in 2016, when the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health wrote their report, which I think was actually published in November.
Well, it was dated November 2016, but it wasn't actually released to the media and posted on the hospital website, although it was shortly thereafter taken down. But it was actually released to the media in February 2017.
Right. Well, because obviously I'm in contact with lots of the nurses still on the unit at this point, and there had been murmurings that they'd been really busy, that the Royal College had been called in to do a report, there'd been a spike in deaths, etc. And one of them told me to read the report. So I obtained a copy, and quite frankly, when I read it, I just cracked out laughing because it said that they had inexperienced staff, not enough staff, too many locums, no communication between the doctors and the nurses, or very little. The doctors were only doing 2 ward rounds a week.
Versus what I believe is an expected standard of 2 per day. Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
On each shift, there should be a ward round. This is an intensive care unit and a high dependency unit. There should be definitely 2 ward rounds a day and a couple of grand rounds a week. They also said in this report that they needed 2 advanced neonatal nurse practitioners. Well, they had 2 advanced neonatal nurse practitioners. I was one of them.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, you laughed when you saw that, and I can completely understand. But obviously, this is no laughing matter, is it? Because of course we know what the ramifications were.
Yeah.
Of, I think it was 8 senior nurses that were got rid of and replaced with nursery nurses, agency nurses.
So so there was, I just cracked out laughing when I read the report, because it said you need 2 ANPs. Well, you had 2 ANPs.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, the report didn't read as if any of the consultants or the people interviewed told the Royal College that they'd had us and we'd been got rid of, which is another thing that was hidden, I think, even from the Royal College.
Yeah. So you touched just then on the number of ward rounds, which brings me to a question I also have in relation to changes in staffing as a result of the Countess being downgraded to a level 2 unit around 20 years ago. You've talked about how that impacted the nursing staff, but am I right in thinking that there were also implications for the doctors as well? Because my understanding is that there were 7 consultants at the neonatal unit of the Countess back in 2015 and 2016, but none of them were neonatologists. They were all paediatric consultants. So is there a link there with the doctors as well, in that you end up at the level 3 units with the proper neonatologists, but at these more provincial level 2 and level 1 units, you don't tend to have proper neonatologists? Am I right there?
We never had neonatologists in Chester, ever.
Even when you were level 3?
Even when we were level 3, we had consultant paediatricians. And in actual fact, we only had 4 consultant paediatricians. However, they had a very prominent presence, and there was a real connection that you could pick up the phone regardless of the time, day or night, and they would come in, they would be there. And we had excellent registrars. We also had...
So to be clear, if there was a need for a fully qualified neonatologist to come to the Countess, they would be called from one of the level 3 units?
No. We never had neonatologists. The doctors could phone Liverpool Women's, where there was neonatologists.
Right, and they would get advice.
And they would get advice. And that was still happening in Lucy's time, though.
Although, just to mention my own experience with respect to this Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health report, that was the report that I dug out 2.5 years ago when I first read about this trial that was about to begin.
Yeah.
And I looked at that report, and to me, it was just a litany of failings and issues that explained very clearly why there had been elevated mortality.
But you also have to throw into the mix, which I don't think has been put out, that the hierarchy of the medical staff was always the consultants, then you have the career paediatric registrars, and then you had 2 arms, which in the past used to be called senior house officers. One arm would be senior house officers that were GP trainees, and one was senior house officers that were paediatric trainees. Now, I was told that sometime around 2013, 2014, the Dean of the Medical Faculty decided, for whatever reason, to remove the arm that was the senior house officer who were training to be paediatricians. So that just left general practitioner trainees who are very good, but they're not paediatricians and they don't come with some of that additional experience. So the medical experience was further diluted. And in the trial, one of the GP trainees who was giving evidence said, I'm a GP trainee. I was out of my depth because they're in an intensive care unit, a neonatal intensive care unit. So it's, it all came together to create the perfect storm.
Yeah. And I've just remembered now what I was trying to think of just now about this Royal College report, which said that highlighted the fact that there was a reluctance amongst doctors to escalate concerns and to seek advice.
Yeah.
Which presumably was a reference to what you were talking about happened in your day, which is that the paediatric consultants would call one of the level 3 units to get advice from a proper neonatologist. And this Royal College report was suggesting that wasn't happening.
But you also have to remember that when you have senior nursing staff, I would have no qualms if I thought I needed a consultant to pick up the phone, even if one of the doctors was arguing with me and saying, no, we don't want to disturb them, it's 2 a.m, whatever, I would be very happy to pick up the phone. Junior nurses like Lucy may not have that knowledge or experience or confidence to pick up the phone and to escalate concerns. So again, you've got maybe a registrar who doesn't want to involve the consultant. If I'd have been there, I'd have said, look, I'm sorry, I'm phoning the consultant. But if you've got junior nursing staff, they're going to tend to go along with the registrar because they can't hold their corner arguing the way an experienced nurse can and justify the reasons why, look, I think we need to escalate this and get a consultant in.
Yeah, I think there was another reference, wasn't there, in the Royal College report that nurses would respond to certain situations depending on which consultant was on duty. Not quite sure what that means, but what you're setting out, Michele, is a situation where registrars wouldn't escalate concerns to the consultants. They might not want to wake them up at 2 a.m, or the pediatric consultants not seeking advice from neonatologists at level 3 units. My good friend, Dr. Michael McConville, who I did some podcasts with, he told me a story about he was ringing around trying to get advice late at night, and he ended up calling California, a unit in California. That's just what you did. You did what you needed to do to get the advice that you needed, and it just sounds to me like this is something that wasn't happening.
There's also a bit of an ethos within the medical profession. So if you're a registrar and you're training in that given speciality, you don't always want to phone the consultant because it can be seen as you don't know what you're doing, or there's a reluctance. And
well, that was the word that was used in the Royal College report, a reluctance.
Yeah, a reluctance to escalate it up further and call in a consultant. So going back to the Royal College in 2017, I read the report. And then I started to hear rumours from the nurses that they were told that in rotation, everybody was going to be moved off the unit to increase their skills in various departments. And it just so happened that Lucy was the first nurse who was going to be removed. And she was moved into an office job. And then I heard that the police had been called in. And then I heard that they were questioning Lucy, and Lucy had been formally suspended by this point. So in 2018, I phoned Cheshire Police and spoke to a policewoman. and explained who I was. And I asked her if she'd read the Royal College of Paediatric report. Her attitude was, well, no, why is that relevant? So I proceeded to tell her about you can't run a neonatal, you can't run any intensive care unit with no senior nursing staff. And she just wasn't interested. She wanted to know if I knew Lucy, if I worked with Lucy, and did I have any evidence against Lucy? To which my answers were no, no, and no. And that was the end of my conversation with Cheshire Police.
Wow. Well, that's shocking, Michele, because that was still quite early in the investigation, when presumably there should have been this open-minded approach.
Yes.
Looking to get evidence from all sorts of parties, whether it was evidence that supported the case for there having been no inflicted harm or otherwise. And what you're saying is that your call was completely dismissed by
they weren't interested at all. And I think that's one of the problems with this whole investigation, that they didn't look at every single aspect of things that could have affected the rise in mortality or morbidity. You talked about the roster chart.
Well, I was going to come to that, yes.
You're a statistician, you could see it was flawed straight away. When I saw it, I also knew it was flawed, but probably for very different reasons than you saw it was flawed, because I knew that Lucy was one of only a few nurses who were full-time. She wasn't married. She didn't have children, so she didn't have those commitments. So she could very easily switch shifts, work extra shifts. And I mean, it's basic maths to me that if you're full-time on a roster chart, working up to 60 hours a week.
She was saving to buy a house as well.
She was saving to buy a house,
be keen to do extra shifts.
Compared with some of the nurses I know only work 15 hours a week. It's not surprising.
You told me something as well about benefits. And
yes, I don't
nurses could only do a maximum.
Yeah, I think if you're on benefits, if you're a single parent, there's this magical 16 hours a week you can work to.
And that's the maximum.
Yeah, but that's set by the benefit office. It's nothing to do with the
what you're
hospital.
Saying is that there may have been nurses on the roster chart who would only be able to do a maximum number of hours a shift, and yet they were being sort of compared on the same basis. To Lucy Letby, who was working
60 hours a week.
60 hours, perhaps.
Yeah. So 3 times as many
you're not
hours
comparing
as them.
apples with apples, which of course is a breach of basic statistical principles.
And I was also very concerned because I had read that there were 17 neonatal deaths. And of course, Lucy was only charged with 7, though in the beginning it was 8.
You're right, it was 8, and then
one was changed to attempted murder.
Well, one was a not guilty.
That was right.
Verdict,
yes,
That the prosecution didn't offer any evidence 4 months before the main trial started. But that still left the attempt. That was Baby K murder charge, and then but that still left the Baby K attempted murder charge. Yes.
So I don't understand how you can have a roster chart without stating everybody's working hours and all the babies who died, not just the ones you've cherry-picked.
Absolutely, So, and not just that, but some of the nurses may have started at the Countess well into that period of elevated mortality. Some of them may have stopped working during that period. And that wasn't taken account of as well. So all sorts of things.
And also the medical staff weren't on. The cleaners weren't on. The ward clerks weren't on that roster. If you're going to have an open and honest investigation, you have to look at everybody.
Wasn't Arian Powell asked to put a roster chart together, and she included the doctors in that, but then she was told to remove the doctors?
No, I think she did compile a roster chart including the medical staff, but she was shocked after it had gone to Dr. Stephen Breary, who had forwarded on to the senior management, but he'd removed the medical staff. So she was very upset about that.
Well, not surprising.
Yeah.
You're upset.
Yeah.
Many other people would be upset to hear that. Yeah.
And going back to the staffing during the time there was this spike in deaths, we know the consultant Alison Timmis wrote to management saying the nurses are in tears, they're overworked. If something, I mean, they were even running out of basic
chaos, didn't she? Chaos on the unit.
Yeah, and they were running out of very basic equipment such as incubators, which is indicative of how many babies were coming in through the doors. And she said it's going to result in children's lives or the physical and mental well-being of our staff. And then subsequent to that, via Thirlwell, we now know that Ariane Powell wrote a very, very good business case of why she was requesting 10 extra registered nurses and possibly 2 advanced neonatal nurse practitioners. Now, if you're looking for funding for 10 extra registered nurses, that is a clear indication of how short-staffed you are.
Yes, good Lord. So just a couple of things from me. On this roster chart, with all of the nurses across the horizontal axis, I think there were 37 nurses. Do you know anything about roughly how many of those nurses were nursery nurses, agency nurses, registered nurses?
No. I mean, and that's another big fault with the roster chart, because some of the nurses who were on it probably were non-clinical. So if you take the practice development nurse, she's there to train the nurses, but she's not necessarily in the nursing numbers working clinically. Same with the manager. The manager is a registered nurse who would be on the off duty, but is not necessarily working clinically. So again, you can't compare it, and it didn't highlight who was a registered nurse and who was a nursery nurse. So we have no way of knowing. But a nursery nurse definitely should not have been looking after any babies other than special care babies. And again, if you go back to Ariane Powell's business case, she very clearly says that they never closed, even if they knew they were breaking the British Association of Perinatal Medicine's guidelines. These babies just kept coming in and they were accommodating them. I think in one of her quotes from her business case, which I have here, it says, many units in the region will often close once the BAPM standards have been exceeded, and therefore will likely close before reaching full occupancy. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester continues to stay open despite exceeding the BAPM guidelines.
Good Lord. And sorry, just where was that from?
This is in the business case that Ariane wrote in January 2016, requesting 10 extra registered nurses. I mean, it goes on to say there was a skill mix review undertaken by the Northwest Operational Delivery Neonatal Network, which highlighted that we, Chester, were significantly understaffed with registered nurses compared with the standards and other units within the region.
Very damning, isn't it?
It's very damning. I mean, she wrote a very good business case, and it very clearly highlights the problems. She continues to say that they need a further 10 Band 5 registered nurses and 2 Band 8A ANNPs in order to maintain a safe service. The document then discusses the benefits of increasing the nursing staff by such numbers, including patient safety improvements in care, reducing morbidity and mortality, fewer events, the reduced need to transfer baby to other neonatal units, because when they were really busy they were, and to reduce the risk of nosocomial infection outbreaks. And again, the infection outbreaks, we know they had problems with the plumbing.
So the scene that you're laying out, Michelle, is of a unit that was absolutely not, well, let's say it bluntly, not fit for purpose.
Well, I think it's like playing a game of Jenga. If you have the game of Jenga, you have a tower with bricks in, and you can pull out some of the bricks and the tower will remain standing. But you will get to a point, if you pull out enough bricks in enough areas, that the tower will collapse. And that's what happened in the Countess of Chester Hospital.
That's a very good analogy. So, in other words, you keep taking out bricks, you keep laying off senior, well-qualified nurses, and eventually things will hold together for a while, but eventually...
Yeah. It's a slow drip, drip, drip of erosion. And that's, in my opinion, exactly what happened in Chester.
So we got to June 2016. Lucy was removed from the unit, and the prosecution then subsequently put a case together as to why she was the cause of this elevated mortality. So presumably the unit, and also at the time the unit was downgraded from level 2 to level 1.
Yeah.
Presumably, if the prosecution argued that the elevated mortality was due to Lucy and that she was no longer on the unit, the unit was upgraded again to level 2.
No,
right?
It's never been upgraded. It's still a level 1.
Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? What does that tell you?
It's still a level 1. And what also has not been in the press, which some of my friends told me, was after the unit was downgraded, and all this came out supposedly about Lucy, and there was malicious attacks, they increased the registered nurses, and they have 2 ANNPs on the unit.
Well,
it's not rocket science to work out. You know, they tried to then fix the problem. It wasn't removing Lucy from the unit that stopped the mortality. It was downgrading it and increasing the staff.
Yeah, well, it's certainly interesting that the unit is still a level 1. I think that's very instructive, and not sure quite what's going on there. But,
well, interestingly, there was a document from Thirlwell at one point that looked at, I think it was in 2013-14, upgrading the unit from a level 2 to a level 3, which didn't happen. They downgraded it from a level 2 to a level 1 after Lucy in 2017, when the police were involved. There is rumours they want to re-increase it to a level 2. However, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think they still even yet have a neonatologist working there. And you should have a neonatologist.
So it sounds like some of the nursing staff issues have been addressed, but still not to the extent maybe that they need to be. And in terms of the doctors, it's still just pediatricians.
It's still just pediatricians.
Whereas there is a need also for
neonatologists.
Yeah. Michelle, was there anything else you wanted to mention in relation to this whole question of staffing?
I think it's very easy for the NHS as a whole, because nurses are employees and doctors have completely different contracts, to, when there is ever any cost issues, to think, oh, we'll just get rid of those nurses, because nurses are expensive. But at the end of the day, you get what you pay for, and they come with experience, they come with knowledge. And by putting people of lower grades with lesser education into roles under various terminology, you are potentially asking them to care for patients above their capabilities. And it's not just in neonatal units this happens, it's in all walks of the NHS. And I think registered nurses need to be appreciated and looked after by the NHS far more than they are currently. It's like they're a commodity that can just be got rid of. And it really has to stop.
Well, the phrase, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, springs to mind.
Exactly.
Well, Michele, it's been fascinating talking about this whole question of staffing, not just related to nursing, which is your background, but other aspects as well.
And thank you, Peter, for inviting me to do one of your podcasts.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have such a great interviewee. So,
Thank you.
Michele, thank you.
Thank you.